Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for turning up this afternoon. We're all very grateful, and we're hopefully in due for a very, very enjoyable discussion. My name is Ike EJ. I'll be the chair of this afternoon's panel debate. I'm also head of housing, architecture and urban space at Policy Exchange, who've obviously convened today's event. So, a few hours ago, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer told us that economic stability is a premium. So we're here to decide or discuss or debate whether beauty is a premium as well when it comes to house building. Now, since the general election, some of you may know, a certain number of Labour MPs have come under criticism for their previous or current criticism of new housing developments, which they've made on the grounds of aesthetics or quality not being good enough. And the argument has been that how can a government that is supposedly committed to building 1.5 million homes during the life of this parliament and easing the housing crisis, how can it tolerate housing being dismissed or criticised on the basis of beauty or on the basis of quality? So what we're basically here to discuss today is, does the fact that we have a housing crisis, does the fact that we have all these critical social and socio-economic problems associated with the housing crisis, such as a long housing waiting list for council accommodation, such as in London, affordability rates, 14 times, basically, the average price of a house is now 14 times your average salary. We have a huge housing benefit bill. Some predict that by 2050, it will outstrip the annual budget of the Russian army. So basically, all these things are at play with a housing crisis. Does that mean that we cannot afford to have, in our rush for quantity, does it mean we can't afford to consider quality to be important as well? Right, it won't take Socrates to figure out the opinion of somebody who is from a unit called Building Beautiful to realise what my answer to that may be. But today's not a sermon, it's a discussion, it's a debate. And we have four esteemed panellists who are going to help us navigate this difficult waters about architectural beauty and between quantity and quality. I'll just give a quick introduction of each person before I'll hand over to them to do a kind of 5 minutes talk, and then we'll have a time for a public discussion and debate right at the end of the session. So first we'll hear from Margaret Main, who is the new MP for Dagenham and Rainham in my fellow patch of East London. Dagenham and Rainham, as you may know, has been at the forefront of urban residential regeneration efforts for the past 20, 30 years, with huge, enormous regeneration schemes coming along, Barking Riverside, Thames Gateway, etc. I also believe the Becontree Estate, which I think is in your constituency, is, believe it or not, supposed to be the largest public housing development in the world. So very much residential development is key to Margaret's constituency, so she will have lots of insights to hopefully offer us on this discussion. After Margaret, we shall hear from Ben Derbyshire, who's over to my extreme right. Not far right, obviously. Be careful what you say in our current surrounds at the moment. But anyway, Ben Derbyshire.
The old jokes are the best.
Yes, they are. I've been waiting to do that since the last conference. Ben Derbyshire is an ex-president of the RIBA, and he's chair of HTA, which is an architectural practice which does lots and lots of residential work. They're very much respected in the area of residential development over several decades that they've done. After Ben, we shall hear from my colleague here, who's Jack Shaw. Jack Shaw is a senior fellow at Labour Together, and a very much involved in housing policy and bringing housing to a fore from a kind of policy framework, policy perspective. That's also very important with the political engagement we're all trying to seek through these kind of discussions as well. And then last but not least, we'll hear from to my left,
very true,
Nicholas Boy-Smith, who is Director of Office of Place. Chair of Office of Place, and he was also the chair of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which is a landmark commission. Its report, Living with Beauty, published in 2020, has been influential on certainly the last government's housing policy, and well, it's fair enough to wait to see how much influence they have on the current government. So anyway, that's enough. It's enough from me. That's the introductions. But as I said, the key kind of driver and the key ambition of this debate is to get to the crux of this issue of how we validate, how we secure quality when we have this completely understandable drive to meet quantity and create more housing supply as well. So enough from me. We'll now hear from our esteemed ministerial colleague, Margaret Main MP for Dagenham and Rainham. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. It's very exciting. The concept of beauty in housing development is very interesting to me, subjective and very much open to interpretation. It was introduced by the last Tory government, and that would have been possibly their 12th, 13th or 14th housing minister in 2021 to be included in the National Policy Planning Framework. The reality, of course, is that it's a catchphrase and pretty meaningless. When I look at the block of flats in my Dagenham and Rainham constituency since 2021, I don't see any evidence of any extra beauty in any of those buildings. COVID taught us the value of building beauty into our communities. As we came out of the pandemic, people were fleeing city centres, boxes in the sky, in search of houses with outdoor space. Even before this, there was a growing desire for more gentle density in our cities and the architecture of heritage, the kind of neighbourhoods that boast a character and help nurture those feelings of belonging and identity in communities. I think something we have been gradually building out of Britain for a number of reasons. Sadly, the primary reason appears to be a combination of corporate greed and the financial crisis facing local authorities, both aiming to maximise units on developments for either increased council tax receipts or profit. It doesn't have to be like this, there is another way. We mentioned earlier in Dagenham, the Becontree Estate was a purpose-built suburban social housing development, the largest of its kind in the world. It boasted front and back gardens, indoor toilets, parking for the Ford Cortinas, and social infrastructure that we all can only dream of in modern placemaking, with lidos, pubs, health facilities, schools, parks and space, a commodity we see so little of now. The Becontree Estate was a source of great pride, and we used to rehome families when we cleared the slums in the East End in the 1920s. New tenants received a booklet when they moved in, outlining their civic responsibilities, which included keeping their nets clean and maintaining your gardens. The Becontree Estate was not let on a traditional social rent and has paid for itself over and over. Unfortunately, Right to Buy has completely transformed the area, which is now almost unrecognisable with a mixture of HMOs and short-term tenancies. My point being that it isn't only the physical architecture of a place which constitutes beauty. I'm interested to see well-designed places built for people and nature, where families choose to live, put down roots for their future. It's their home and they wish to thrive. That's about ensuring we build the Becontree estates of the future with the schools, with the health service, leisure facilities and shops, the public transport connectivity and the green spaces that are so needed. Angela Rainham wants to see the creation of new towns in the form of urban extensions to existing towns or cities. In fact, in my neighbouring constituency, this is happening. Barking Riverside, planning to grow 11,000 homes and has the infrastructure and all the rail links. There is a good mix of tenures and design standards of the homes have been thoughtfully delivered. So we don't have to go back several decades to see what looks good and what would make a community happy. The question is Barking Riverside beautiful? It is functioning, families are choosing to buy homes and settle there, and it's a diverse community that is cohesive. In any event, I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder rather than the pages of the National Planning Policy Framework. I want to finish by coming back to the title of this event. Is less beauty the price we pay to get more homes? Developers will certainly have us thinking that, quoting viability models at us. I've been at many planning meetings and plans are put before elected councillors. I used to be an elected councillor in Dagenham. And you would question the kind of beauty and you'd be pitching in for your residents. And quite often we're met with kind of, it isn't really in the picture at the moment because it's about how many can we build, the profit, and that's all getting lost in those discussions. So I ultimately believe the political will is there and the onus is on house builders to establish communities rather than let's build it and beat it. If infrastructure and thoughtful planning is made a prerequisite of development, we can make beauty viable again in the planning process for our communities. Thank you.
Very Very good. Just very briefly, two takeaways I'd take from that, which I think are really important for our future debate as well, would be A, beauty isn't just about what things look like or style, or it's a whole encompassing thing. It's about place, it's about community, it's about people feeling connected and people feeling at home. And I think that's something that's very important to consider when we're having a debate about beauty. That it's not just necessarily about what buildings look like. And also, secondly, the Beacon Estate, this shows we can do wonderful council housing. We have this idea in our heads of council houses being dystopian tower blocks or abandoned garages, etc. We didn't used to do council housing, public housing, social housing like that. And the Beacon Estate, anyone who doesn't know it intimately, I'd recommend us having a quick look at what it's all about. It doesn't look anything like what the later post-war permutations of a council house were. So we can even get beauty for the people who are the most vulnerable, economically vulnerable in our society. Right, enough from me, and now on to
Thank you very much.
Derbyshire.
Thank you very much, Ike. So first of all, I'm going to deal with the semantic elephant in the room that we always have when we find ourselves in groups talking about beauty. I'm very helpful of you, Ike, to have written in your Beauty and Socialism, How the Left Can Put Beauty Back into Britain, to have given us a definition based on William Morris's enthusiasm for the subject. Beauty is not, Ike says, simply about making things prettier, but it delves deep into a proud Labour heritage of seeking to improve living and working conditions for the poor while giving them unfettered access to the quality, refinement and resilience that less progressive ideologies had historically reserved for the rich. Now, I can work with that. I'm assuming you can as well. So I'm going to deliver the rest of my presentation using that assumption, that definition of the word beauty. And when it comes to the challenge we've been put, is it the price we pay to build more homes? I'm going to argue that we can and should, especially at the beginning of a Labour term of administration, have our cake and eat it. We should aim to have all the houses we need, and they should all be beautiful in Ike's definition. And shameless puff, I'm going to base my contribution on a book that I wrote based on my 50 years of practice as a housing architect, available from Amazon. I wish I could say it was labelled from all good bookshops, but it's not. So I'm going to cover three major issues first. Council housing, first and foremost, Margaret. Second, resources. Third, reuse. And then fourth, I'm going to talk about the speculative house builders and a load of issues, some low-hanging fruits especially, that I think will tackle some of the worries many of us have about speculative house building. And finally, I'm going to return to the semantic issue. So first of all, council housing. So I think it's now widely agreed, right across the political spectrum, that we are never going to achieve 300,000 homes a year without 1.5 million homes over the term of a parliament, without a very significant increase in the amount of council housing. And I mean council housing at social rent, because housing isn't like any other market. It doesn't respond immediately to supply. So it really troubles me that the lack of council housing is causing immense cost to the nation in terms of poor health and people living in the wrong place and in poor circumstances. And of course, there's only one solution to it, which is to spend money. And the money is going to have to affect the PSBR. It seems to me completely inevitable. But the Treasury will be repaid with a massive saving in housing benefit payments, now bankrupting councils, which also line the pockets of unscrupulous rentiers. So I think it's a well worthwhile investment, and the savings from the National Health Service and increased employment and economic growth will more than offset the original investment. It's a worthwhile borrowing. Secondly, resources. So I'm the RIBA rep on the National Home Building Council, where I learn that the biggest challenges that warranty provider envisages in delivering all of these homes are shortages. Shortages of human resources and shortages and increasing costs of materials. They think that we are going to struggle to deliver because the whole industry has run down to such a significant degree. And for many years, I've been arguing, and it was very depressing, I thought, that the early years of the coalition government, the industrial strategy that we had, which set eye-watering targets for home building. 50% improvement in programming, 30% reductions in cost, those sorts of things. That can only be delivered with significant investment in off-site manufacture. So we firmly believe that we need to reinvest, get back so much of the capacity that we've lost through bankruptcy because the previous government just did not support off-site manufacture, and there was no adequate industrial strategy. And if you want to know whether or not council housing can produce beautiful buildings, just have a look at its entries to the Neve Brown Award, which I instigated when I was president of the RIBA. You'll see some very beautiful social council housing there. Thirdly, don't waste buildings, reuse buildings. The chair of Historic England reckons that there are 670,000 homes to be obtained from the renovation and reuse of existing buildings of all different kinds. And he asserts quite rightly that the greenest buildings that we've got are the ones that we've already got. Finally, the house builders, the major house builders. They build, top 3 house builders build 25% of all new homes, and the top 10 build half of the new homes built. What must we do to fix beauty in that sector? Well, I've got plenty of suggestions here and some low-hanging fruit. Strategic planning for housing needs to see housing as infrastructure. It needs to be in the right place, and they need to be the right homes. They need to be planned. We've got to reduce land value speculation. Land value capture to afford quality and social infrastructure is critical. At the moment, the profits line the pockets of the land owners, fortunate enough to be sitting on designated land. We need to bring local authority highway departments to share, rather than frustrate, the task of building beautifully. New developments are riven by enormous road schemes. We need to increase resources and expertise in local planning departments. The Labour Party have said they're going to do something about that. We need to enable a universal and early involvement of interdisciplinary design review panels everywhere on all projects. We need to mandate, it's a very basic point here and very easy to do, the currently optional nationally described space standards, and we should use standards like Building for Life 12, which is a helpful building standard. I've got more, but I think I'm probably running out of time because I want to return to beauty, if I may, Ike. Many of us, me included, applauded the recommendations of Living with Beauty, which was the report of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission that Nicholas latterly chaired. And I think the key to this problem that we have about beauty is in the title of that study, Building Better and Building Beautifully. And in my own practice, we subscribe to 4 key principles: order, humanity, sustainability, and yes, beauty. And of course, Vitruvius, the father of contemporary architecture only 2,000 years ago, wrote that firmitas, utilitas, and venustas, the Latin phrases, the last one meaning beauty, are the 3 indispensable virtues of architecture. So, finally, beauty on its own was never enough to convey all that we need for human well-being, and removing the word from the highest level in the NPPF is the right thing to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Very interesting. It's good to hear another endorsement of council housing. So that's hopefully at least half the panel so far have met a consensus. And it's very useful to get a kind of broader overview of the kind of industrial infrastructure and conditions that need to be improved or made more efficient in order for beauty to be realised. So that's very helpful. Thank you. And over now to a colleague here, Jack Shaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ben, you spared me having to pronounce those Latin phrases that I was going to otherwise. I actually spent a decade living on the Becontree estate as well, so there we go. I'm going to make 3 points. The first point is that beauty is important. The second point is I'm going to challenge your question, which is less beauty the price we pay for more homes? And then I'm going to try and be a little bit controversial at the end, otherwise we might agree on everything. So the first point is, of course, beauty is important, and primarily I think not through the lens of kind of the physical architecture, but because of the effective role that it plays on people. There's a whole host of peer-reviewed research that shows that how people feel and think is influenced by their built environment. And specifically, Thomas Heatherwick talks about this kind of visual complexity and how people feel walking past buildings. We've seen research in the US that tells us that people feel kind of more stressed when they walk past monotonous buildings because there's less visual complexity. And we also know that it boosts pride in place and people's connection to areas as well. But crucially and kind of strategically in the context of housing policy, we also know that well-designed buildings lends longer-term legitimacy to that mission of building 1.5 million homes. Which brings me on to my second point, which is therefore I don't think there's a kind of tension between the speed of house building and beauty, or whether we call it character or something, another similar proxy. Where I think there is a tension is the speed of homes and viability rather than beauty. And I would just reflect on sitting on planning committees myself, especially in the last couple of years, that when those planning applications are approved and they come back to planning committees because they're no longer viable, the first things that go are the brick, which is a kind of cheaper brick that returns, or the balcony, which is a cheaper facade. And I actually think we should do more to kind of protect those where we can. The challenge is, or good or bad depending on where you are on the spectrum, is that character alone isn't sufficient. Lots of people would argue, and certainly developers that would be encouraged to challenge you legally, to reject house building. So there's a question about the role specifically that beauty plays within the system. The second point, and by virtue of that, I should say, that means that we jettison beauty all the time in defence of viability. And then the third point I would make, a final observation, I'm not wedded to this, but I just want to throw it in there.
Go on.
Which is, I mean, in the US, they're grappling with similar challenges that we are. They have a housing crisis over there, and some of the political dynamics are the same. They're having lots of conversations about the role of the planning system, and one of the conclusions that they've drawn is maybe we're asking the planning system to do too much. Maybe nutrient neutrality, net zero, fixing our reservoirs, beauty, maybe that's too much for the planning system and we should separate that, and maybe beauty shouldn't be part of the conversation. So I just want to posit whether or not some sort of deregulatory approach might be something that would be worth considering as well.
Thank you. Very good. A very good reminder of the fact that all of this, everything we're talking about depends on the planning system. Depends on the planning system working, being efficient, being good enough to recognise beauty, and being brave enough to dismiss what we don't think is high quality enough, etc. And all too often, for whatever reason, talk about balconies and bricks being jettisoned. It happens throughout the planning process, and it's a profound problem that, unless we address it, nothing's going to improve, or we're not going to get the increased quality that we're all hopefully striving for. I'm disappointed no one has yet come out and said they want ugly buildings, but hopefully Nicholas here will add that touch of dispute onto our panel.
You're not expecting me to say that.
Of course not. I just put the idea in your head.
Okay, thank you. I'll see where that goes. Thank you. Thank you, Ike. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for 3 excellent talks. I'm going to argue, I talk a lot about the planning system. I'm going to try not to today. I'm going to argue that beauty is an existentially necessary, but actually insufficient, because everyone on the panel is right. There's far more ways and necessary ways to think about the quality and the humanity of the places we create. The beauty is a necessary, but ultimately not in itself enough for thinking about what we build and in building those 4 million homes that we are short. And I think underpinning all this argument has been implicit, but let's make it really explicit. We are desperately short of homes and affordable homes. That is having a catastrophic consequence for the quality of life, for labour market flexibility, for choice, for economic growth, for fairness in our society. I think we all know that, but I think it sometimes just needs to be restated in the most emphatic of terms, and it is a crisis. Again, I think something we can all agree on. So does it seem eccentric to talk about the quality, the beauty, the livability, the humanity, the loveliness of the places we create in that context? What should we build? Where should we pass our time? What does it matter what we look at, where we live, where we spend our brief days on this planet? I'm going to argue that it is incredibly necessary. For at least 2,000 years, probably more, poets and politicians, masons and mayors, artists and architects, I can't think of any more acronyms, any more couplings, have agreed that beauty is a virtue in and of itself, an end to our endeavours, be they artistic or everyday, and a balm to life's inevitable companions of sadness, of loneliness, and of loss. Artists and architects have sought to create it because they did. Patrons have sought to pay for it because it's the sort of thing that they do. Writers have debated whether it is to be found in the divine, or in the natural, or in the human, or in the urban. Conservatives have sought to conserve it. Radicals have sought to find it, to broaden it out. But they've all agreed that it is necessary in some, ineffably existential way to the quality of lives that we lead. Octavia Hill, when she started the process that led not just to the National Trust, but actually also to our modern planning system, wrote that we all want beauty for the refreshment of our souls. And she sought to create it, not just in the houses, but in the places, or what we would now call social housing, that she caused to be built in South London, not far from where I live. Ebenezer Howard did likewise. The 1909 Planning Act talked about its aim to create the place salubrious and the house beautiful. It was completely normal on both sides of what we now call the political divide. Interestingly, the early modernists thought exactly the same. Charles Edward Jonneret, who calls himself Le Corbusier, wrote, "That is construction. Suddenly you touch my heart. You do me good. I am happy. I say this is beautiful." It was completely normal. And then during the 20th century, I think two things happened. The first was what I might rudely call treasury brain kicked in very profoundly. The desire to find the functional and the utilitarian in all our arguments. Now, I don't decry the importance of the functional and the utilitarian, but it has led to a poverty of our thinking, to our imagination of the places we create. I think Fiona Reynolds, the former MD of the National Trust, put this best in her brilliant book, The Fight for Beauty, a few years ago. And forgive me, I'm going to just read it out. Today, to talk of beauty in policy circles risks embarrassment. It's felt both to be too vague a word, lacking precision, and paradoxically, given its appeal, by contrast with official jargon, elitist. Yet in losing the word beauty, we have lost something special from our ability to shape our present and to shape our future. Architects also, in parallel, I think, with that process of treasury brain, largely abandoned the words. When some of the let's not get into the argument now, but when some of the challenges to traffic modernism in the mid-20th century emerged in terms of its unlovability and its unsustainability, it was necessary to argue that beauty was superficial, didn't matter. So Maxwell Fry famously, rather shockingly, wrote that we need to address ourselves only to those capable of understanding us and let the rest go hang. So beauty fell out of youth, both on the design and on the professional side. Not entirely. But quality does matter. Place does matter. I argue that it matters at three scales. At the what you might call the child's eye level, the brick, the texture, the leaves. At the adult's eye, as you walk around the street, as you feel safe or not safe from cars or from other humans. And then, if you like, at the bird's eye, the quality of overall place, how it plugs into to other neighbourhoods. The good news is the government, actually both this one and the last one, agrees that place matters. They see still, and it's incorrect that the government has taken beauty out of the NPPF. It's taken it out as an operational function, but it's still kept it there as an existential aim, which I think is a very good thing, and they have indeed called it an important objective of well-designed places. And I think that's the key point. If beauty is top-down, what we as communities, as neighbourhoods need to do is to discover what we mean by good places, where we can lead good, happy, connected, durable lives locally. And there's an emergingly good framework for that. It needs some improvements, I think, largely set in the National Model Design Code. And so I think, for this government, I think for any government facing the housing shortage that we face, thinking about beauty and place quality is therefore an essential step to changing the political perception of housing and new planning. Remember, in a poll done a few years ago, 2% of people trusted developers to build good new places that would improve their existing place. And for those of you who are planners, I'm afraid the figure for planners was 7%, which is better, multiples better, but still, I think we can all agree, probably not good enough. So why does it matter, in terms of your question, why does it matter to the political left? Well, it matters for support. Polls are really clear. The vast majority of people, left to right, up, down, rich, poor, north, south, and all colours and demographics, prefer places which they find humane, lovable, interesting, and feel safe and walkable. As Jack has alluded to, the evidence that the sorts of places in which we can naturally and safely walk around that we find visually pleasing make us happier and healthier is overwhelmingly strong, and my organisation, Create Streets, has done much work on that over the last decade. You should care about it for reasons of social justice. Because if there aren't enough good and beautiful and heartful places to go around, what happens in every single city all the time is that they get, if you like, I was going to say colonised, that's not the word I want to use, they get disproportionately lived in by more prosperous people. So you get those sorting effects, is what economists call it. But actually, ultimately, we should all care about creating lovable and beautiful places for our own sense of humanity, so that we regard the humans not just as counting machines, but as souls as well as brains. Because if we don't, then the other guys will, perhaps. A head of a major house builder, I'm afraid I can't tell you which one, told me some years ago, quote, "Some house builders believe they can build any old crap and still sell it. And when you're millions of homes short," by the way, I don't think many of them do that, but some of them do, then perhaps they are sadly right when we're facing that existential crisis of affordability. I would prefer to end not with that perspective on what we seek to build, but on that of NIMBYism, the last time there was a major programme of Newtown buildings, who wrote, "While we shall be judged for a year or two, ladies and gentlemen, by the number of houses we build, and that is important, we shall be judged in 10 years' time by the type of house we build. And I would argue we will be judged in a generation's time by the quality and the lovability of the places that we seek to place upon this country." Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. A very valid dissection, I think, of the definition of beauty, what we all consider it to be, different interpretations of it, and an interesting point as well about it wasn't entirely removed from the NPPF, but its kind of definition or its emphasis was changed, which is an important point as well, I think. But right, before I open it up to you to ask questions, I've got a couple of questions that stem from that debate, which I thought was very interesting. I wonder, this question generally to everybody. How much people feel, or to what extent any of my fellow panelists feel, that beauty, in terms of something that's been, some people see as potentially negative, how much of that is because people misconstrue beauty as to do with wealth and also traditional architectural style? Do you think any of that kind of influence, that kind of misconception of what beauty is, people talk of beauty, I don't know, maybe think of, I don't know, Blenheim Palace, House of Parliament, whatever. Do they think it's something to do with grandeur, to do with economic wealth, as well as traditional style? And is that something that maybe makes some people, maybe from our architectural kind of community, less keen to embrace it than anyone else otherwise would be?
I was talking to some of my people here, and we was talking about there's an estate that the council built in Dagenham that is lovely, and it's really interesting that if anyone comes to visit, like just for instance, Sadiq Khan was down a few years ago, and I said, why don't you come and have a look at this and what's possible? And you know, these flats and houses overlook the country park in Dagenham, and it is beauty, it is lovely, and for so many reasons. And I'm not having a go at Sadiq Khan, but straight away his assumption was that it wasn't council built, if somebody else had built it. So he said to me, well, who built that then? So I said, the council, and there was genuine kind of shock with that. But the people of Dagenham and Rainham can appreciate that beauty. But I think where it's kind of gone wrong, and there will know beauty when they see it as well. I do genuinely believe that. I don't have to have a prescriptive thing of what is beauty to the people of Dagenham and Rainham. It's got so bad in the kind of rush for trying to get properties and trying to house people and trying to get affordable properties that it's completely gone off the agenda. It's not even spoken about. And it's got to the point now that when, like for instance, the old Ford stamping ground in Dagenham is going to have properties built there, it's just such a relief that the properties are being built and there's going to be some form of social housing there. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief, but the beauty element and what they're going to look like, it doesn't even enter into for the people of Dagenham and Rainham. But that doesn't mean it isn't important to them. Yeah. I just feel it's got lost in what housing has become.
Interesting. Okay, all right. Anybody else to tackle that? Or
I'll have a go.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a soul on earth that doesn't appreciate beauty,
Yeah.
and I think it's clearly a perverse position to obtain that one would argue against it. I think there are interpretations of different ways of designing, that may mislead. For example, I think the early modernists, were very clear that in order to deliver equitable, high quality, socially fair housing, the excess decoration needed to be removed, and the use of modern materials needed to be employed in order to create spaces that weren't previously possible. So I think it's conceivable to suggest that some people may think that the modernists think beauty is somehow a bad thing, and actually what they're seeking is ugliness, but actually clearly not the case, because although there are some very poor modernist buildings, there are equally very poor examples of all other styles. So it's really not about styles, it's not about isms, and of course modernism is a wasm already. We've all moved on. So I genuinely don't think that there is a legitimate antithetical position against beauty per se.
That's good.
I think there is enormous agreement. I mean, we've done loads of visual preference surveys and lots of research at Create Streets. The good news is, in an age where we disagree about many things, slightly depending on how you run the survey, between 70 and 90% of the British people, and I have to say of other countries as well, agree on what they find beautiful, lovely, use whatever word you want. Human scale enclosure, coherent complexity, variety in a pattern, biomorphic forms, forms that morph and mimic nature. Yeah, some level of detail and ornament as you get closer, but as you step away from itself, resolves itself into a pattern that feels natural and humane. That's not what everyone likes, but it's what a very, very clear majority of people in this society and every other society polled. And if you don't like the polling, look at the pricing data on where people choose to pay more, and you basically get the same pattern. It maps almost precisely. So I think we've been quite confident about where people feel at home and where they wish to spend their days.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Good. Jack, anything for that? Or?
Yeah, I would just make a short reflection that in policy terms, I always reflect on Japan, actually, and they use the word love quite a lot in their policy debate. And love reminds me of kind of beauty in this context, which is that we think of policy terms as kind of objective, rational, and somehow beauty feels slightly less so. And I think policy professionals kind of wince to some degree at the idea of beauty being used in a kind of, when you've got a planning regime which is, designed in a very kind of clearly structured, well, not clearly structured, but is intended to be. Beauty kind of feels different to that.
Okay.
I think that's a challenge.
All right, brilliant. Okay, good. I think, yeah. I mean, nobody's gonna. Very few people will come out and bat for ugly buildings. It's not a controversial position to take to say that.
I mean, when I started making the case, not much less than a decade ago, that we should have. I got some pretty robust criticism from, I won't go into who they were, but on the grounds that this shouldn't be done. The most robust criticism, I have to say, was from elements of the design profession who did not want to do it.
What shouldn't be done in terms of making buildings more?
Yeah, that it was a distraction from a pure debate about quantity. So the critics are out there. Right. I think the Overton window has now moved. I think it's a good thing, and I think people of left and right now basically agree. Yeah. Like Octavia Hill, and the planning system of 1909, that we owe this to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which is why, again, coming back to the council housing context, I think it's so important in terms of. Again, it's not necessarily people looking at things and saying, I want this to be beautiful. When you ask them all the things that they would like to have, enclosure, intimacy, nature, community, those are all the things that we traditionally think of as comprising, well, I certainly, beautiful design. So obviously we're committed in Policy Exchange to building beautiful, but I can understand to a degree sometimes how the word beauty can make some people think that things are being imposed upon them, or kind of specific style or kind of economic quality of architecture that isn't necessarily the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do to kind of improve communities and make places better.
I mean, I think there's another word, which is taste. I really like the word love. And in fact, I have a chapter in here called Learning from Loved Housing, because, I think loved housing teaches us a lot about how housing should be now. I think somehow, what we can get we can be offended by what I used to call the mandarins of taste, who see it as their job to impose, what they feel is beautiful upon us.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah.
Can I just make a point about agency,
Okay,
which
yeah.
is...
I'll open it up shortly, but go ahead.
I think we should move to a conversation, and to some degree we're doing that, about not whether or not we should have homes or whether communities want homes, but what they want them to do and what they want them to look like. And often, many of you in this room would have gone through planning consultation processes. I very rarely go through one of those processes where something actually changes at the end from what someone that's been involved in that says. And so I think we do need to give communities much more buy-in into our planning process, not in a way that enables them, small numbers to block large units, but does give them a sense of buy-in. And I think that's one pathway in which we can kind of reconceptualise design, which is not about, how architects or planners might feel, but is how the public think it should function.
That's I really agree. I touched upon something we haven't mentioned yet, which is a word I don't like, which is NIMBYism. This idea that there's an army of secret residents,
maybe it's the audience trying to get word in.
who are literally just sitting there trying to block every housing development around. But anyway, I don't think it's a helpful contribution, but very, very important to consider. Design has to be community-based and to a degree popular as well, as much as it can be. Right, enough for me. Hopefully there's lots of questions from the audience. We'll start over there, move our way from the right to the left, and the current government, and then mind the red tie.
Thank you. I'm from a civic community group in London, Highgate Society. I think, I agree with, you all seem to agree with each other, and I agree with you. But I think the devil is in the detail, and things like tall buildings, for example. Could you comment on where you think tall buildings, sort of 15, 20, 30 stories, fit within a traditionally low-build city like London?
That's a fair question. I'll get one more question, then you can answer it in a batch. So, over there, chap with the red shirt.
I want to say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's very true. You use Park Hill at Sheffield as an example. Some people think it's ugly. I think it's beautiful. But one of the things I want to make is, you've got to look at, we need the numbers. It's a fact, we need the numbers. And the housing crisis is the biggest crisis facing Britain. There's no ifs, no buts. And I went to the Labour event where if Year 9 was in charge of the government, they were in 10 Downing Street, and there was one got up and spoke, and she'd been made homeless, and the housing crisis, that they faced. I don't think they'd have been interested in beauty at all. They just needed somewhere. So it is. I understand what you're saying about beauty, but it is a factor. We've got to look how long we're going to be in power, how many can we deliver, and housing crisis as the biggest crisis. Last thing, we need to dump the right to buy. Council, Bolsover District Council, leading council, building houses at a really good rate, but they're selling them quicker than they're building them.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, over to the panel, I suppose tall buildings and the housing crisis place an expediency on not necessarily prioritising beauty.
Yeah, I'll quickly do both if that's helpful. So, just on tall buildings, tall buildings are jolly hard to get right. They're an irresilient way of making places. They can work. The evidence suggests they work best for people without children, who are rich, and in town or city centres. And there's a place for that. I think we can all agree that. But the evidence also suggests they tend not to work well over time. They age more rapidly than other buildings. They have much higher service and running costs, because if you like, you're bringing parts of the town and the city inside the building, and that becomes the service charge. Often the Barbican is cited as a successful high-rise, and in its way it is. The service charge in Shakespeare Tower is £8,000 a year. That's about 6 years ago. It's presumably gone up since then. So great if you can afford it. It tends not to work over time. So And the best way, in my view, based on the research that I and others have done, to create density, which we desperately need, I passionately agree with you, sir, and actually Margaret used this phrase, it's a phrase I've helped coin, which is gentle density, which is anywhere between, occasionally a semi-detached house, but through terraced housing, up to mansion blocks, perhaps perforated with the odd high-rise. And a gentle density allows you to get the advantages of propinquity. You can walk to the shops, you can walk to the pub, you can afford to have a pub. You can get the agglomerative chance as you go that way, you bump into X as you take your child to school and then you're going to work. So it's the best way of doing that, but also doing it instead of at the 28 homes per hectare that we're currently building Greenfield out at, say, 45 or 55 or 75. Wandsworth in London is at 75 homes per hectare. Pimlico's at 175. If we can build at that density, and the pricing data suggests that when you do it well, people will pay a premium for it for less home, this is very much to your point as well as to yours, then the amount of land you need to build on halves. And the amount of highways infrastructure, Ben was quite right to refer to that, can go down by more than half. And I should say the government did an amazingly good proposal, which we at Create Streets have been pushing for, to move from, to change the way we do transport planning, to make it easier to do walking and cycling schemes. And suddenly, if you get a place which is gentle density, you're not relying on one building to get the density, but you're relying on that pattern, that network of streets and of squares, then suddenly you make it really easy to walk around the corner or to cycle down to the school and not have to jump into a car to meet your quotidian needs. And all the evidence I'm aware of suggests that's the way to do density well.
Ben?
Yes, so I should speak because my practice designs tall buildings. And I agree with Nicholas, they're very difficult to do and they're expensive. I would refer to some of my general points about other contextual issues that must be addressed if we're going to solve this problem of housing that will deliver well-being. I think Londoners are waking up to the fact that tall buildings have been built all over London and they don't like it. And I'm one of them, actually. I think it's giving us all a deeply uneasy feeling. I think clearly, where they're most justifiable is where they're close to transportation and infrastructure and all of that. But I just want to touch on the reason we find ourselves working for clients who design tall buildings, and we do the very best we can to make them as beautiful as possible. And those are land values, the absence of land in cities in particular, and the business model at the moment by means of which affordable and certainly, yes, affordable housing is delivered, which is by cross-subsidising from the for sale homes to the subsidised homes. And the result of that, those two factors, means that the densities have ballooned. And, Nicholas talks of 1,000, what was it, 1,700, 175 homes per hectare. That's right,
yes.
In Pimlico. Well, some of the very high density buildings, are 1,700 homes per hectare because we're building very tall buildings on postage stamp sites. So I do think that, to get round this problem, we need to tackle those things which I had mentioned earlier, which are land value speculation and the business model by means of which affordable housing is built. And the only way around that is by spending more public money on it, I'm afraid to say. And then I think we can have plenty of gentle density.
Margaret, just want an answer to this, and then I'll go back to the...
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the tall buildings. I have to say, in the constituency that I represent, I hear what the gentleman's saying. The need is absolutely massive in the constituency I'm in. But I'll give you I think what worries me about this is where we're saying we're having conversations. It's not NIMBYism, but if you actually go to a neighbourhood and propose one of these tall buildings, and I've got one of these that has been proposed, and I think it's fair to say the kind of borough which Jack, Barking and Dagenham, which we're both councillors on, in the Barking part, there are lots of high-rise. It's near very good transport links, and it does appeal to people to have the flats. Where these particular flats were being proposed, the whole of the neighbourhood, and it wasn't NIMBYism, were against it, and it was very high, not in a very good place, and it was being used as a kind of for the future, that more would be coming once that's been built to that height, and then the whole area is going to be changed, and that is not what people want. So my grievance with that is, and I feel it very strongly as well, is they did a great big consultation and everybody was opposed to it, and it all went through.
Yes, funny
so,
that, isn't it?
Yes, so how many times have we all been at this? And let's be real here. If you are going to speak to the public and advocate like what we're discussing today, if the public come back to you and say, no thanks, I don't want that in my area, that isn't like in the air, and it's not NIMBYism, and it is genuine, and there's a better offer, have that discussion and listen to the people. They don't listen to the people, I'm really sorry, so that's how I see it. Yeah.
If I may, it's such an important point. One of the problems with towers is it's just a jolly good way of stopping people supporting housing.
Jack, quickly on that. And then
Yeah,
I'll-
just
more
very,
questions.
very quickly. I mean, we've done some polling recently. I think the public are open to density, but clearly at the kind of the scale in which Ben and others are talking about is more contentious. Just in the context of beauty and density, I often find that, sites that are 15 stories come to us, and they're not as beautiful as they could be. And I'd be quite happy to see 16 or 17 story sites come at that stage if it meant that the quality was much better. So there are some cases where I think the trade-off can actually result in better quality and to trade that cost off higher density or more homes.
Okay, all right, good. Very relevant. Okay, questions, please. Over here, this chap here. I'll get. We'll ask a batch of about 3 questions, and then the panel will take them on.
Thank you. Firstly, on the point of tall buildings, I think looking overseas is I encourage you to do that. Look at I worked in Sydney. They've drawn heavily on the work of Jan Gell, looking at human scale. You can get the podium level right. People don't tend to worry about what's above it. I can see Nicholas shaking his head, that's fine. So looking at that, and also the point you made about families, if you want families living in them, we need to design family-friendly apartments, which is about making sure the design codes are right up front. The other point I was going to make was about certainty. I'm a town planner, right? The planning system needs certainty. It doesn't need more subjectivity. It also needs good leadership. In Barking and Dagenham, you've got that. I was part of the team that wrote the local plan for Barking and Dagenham, and the community consultation platform that I currently run has been used on Barking Riverside throughout the process. So the point of agency is well made. Again, we need to look about the type of consultation you're using, and I encourage you to look at what's been done in your own constituency there.
Okay, thank you. Another direct question to the panel, please. Over here. Lexi.
Fascinating conversation, debate, guys. So really thank you for illuminating us. My name is Muyiwa Oki, and some of you might know me. I'm the current president of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and it wouldn't be surprised any of you to hear me say that I believe architects are necessary to deliver the quality and beautiful homes that the government is advocating for in their vision. And because we are here at Labour's party conference, the New Government Party's party conference, what do you think the government needs to do to support architects and quality design professionals in helping them deliver the beautiful homes at the scale that they want?
Okay, thank you. One more question, please. Blue suit over here. No, you said. Yeah.
You're really making a lady work.
Oh, no,
One side to the other.
That's efficiency of.
Thank you, Mike Knott from Stantec. We've talked about beauty, explicit or no. It's been referred to implicitly about walking, accessing, quality of place, car parking standards. What should the new government do in terms of being much harder on car parking standards? Local authorities, particularly those that aren't Labour-led, quite like high levels of car parking in new developments. Some house builders here and now regard their market as wanting more car parking standards. Interested in the views, not just you, Nicholas, but others, in terms of trying to drive down car parking provision to improve quality of place and life, health, everything.
Okay, thank you. Okay, parking and what the government can do to help the design profession, essentially. So, over to you.
I better go last because I've been told he doesn't want my views.
Yeah, I just wanted to make 2 points. The first is just coming back to that point on agency. I think one of the challenges with the planning system is that we hear the voices of people that live locally, but when I visit temporary accommodation sites and I speak to people that are on housing waiting lists and so on, we don't have a way through policy making to hear their voices. And so I think it provides a useful context or backdrop against which we should kind of measure some of that opposition. I just want to make a point about car parking as well, which is, and I'm going to be awkward and not answer the question, but just to say the importance of transport, really. I live in a London borough, so there's lots of car-free development, so that's not a problem there. But transport is alongside health services, is the biggest driver for support in house building. And so while I don't necessarily think that means more car parking space, I think we really need to be clear about making sure that that congestion is mitigated, and crucially, where that happens, it's really communicated. And I think more often than not, it feels like that hasn't been done as successfully as it could do.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Ben, you wanted to...
I'd like to answer Muiwa's question. Ask not what this government shall do for you, Muiwa, but consider what you shall do for this government. And there's a great organisation called Architects Action for Affordable Housing. It's grown like Topsy. It has hundreds and hundreds of practices who've joined it. And, it's spending its time thinking, how can we support this government's aims, which are essentially to deliver beautiful housing in very large numbers. And as I said, we should, as a public, should expect our cake and eat it. We must have more affordable housing, and it must all be beautiful. And architects have a really significant role, I think, in seeing that through. Car parking standards. Well, the key to that is making sure that, as I say, homes and home building is seen as the creation of appropriate infrastructure. Like all infrastructure, it should be built in the right place, it should be well designed, and it should be safe to use. And if it's well connected with appropriate alternative means, then the demand for car parking drops. But I know, because I have a lot of clients who are speculative house builders, if you're designing 3 and 4 bed houses, you quite often have to accommodate 3 or 4 car parking spaces for those houses, irrespective of what the planning department thinks, because that's what they think they need to sell those big properties with. And that is a huge problem. And careful design, there are lots of things you can do with design codes and things like that in order to conceal the impact of the motor car. But when it comes to parking at that level, it's really difficult, I agree.
Thank you. Yes, Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just pick up on Jack's point as well about where do you hear the other voices other than the local neighbourhoods when you're proposing. Before I was elected, I run open policy forums. We were working with Arnie Graf, we still are, and it was very interesting across all of the borough. When we called everyone together, the main thing that everyone was concerned about was housing, and that was a broad spectrum of homelessness, their opinions on what should be built, where it should be built. So people are interested, are invested, and it isn't just the people where you're going to build in their neighbourhoods. That's the first thing. The second thing as well with car parking, because we're an outer London borough as well, a lot of the properties that are being built are you can't have a car, which is quite a problem. But at the moment, before the Labour government as well, you've actually got the next generation, the young generation, still living with mum and dad because they can't afford a property. So the cars are their means in the outer London boroughs with not sufficient transport to get about. So I don't see in the immediate future that we're going to have that carless kind of society that some people seek when they're building. And and until such time as you sort out the infrastructure, which in my area isn't there when the build is done, then I don't think you can answer that question. And we'll see, with what Labour's coming in, I think that will get answered.
Okay, short closing statements from Nicholas, please.
Short. You know the stress. First, no car parking in Short. On the point on certainty, which we won't have time to go into now, is the critical point. We've been running an uncontrolled experiment in this country over the last 50 or 60 years with a dramatically less certain planning system than basically anywhere else in the world. And countries that mirrored us, like Australia and New Zealand, basically have moved away from it. So we have to, if you like, as I call it, bring the democracy forward, properly understand what people like and embed that in the local plan rather than leaving it on a case by case. And there was a very, very welcome announcement over the weekend from Matthew Pennycook on plot passports for brownfield sites. Let's not get into that any further. Just on agency, because this is so, so important. There has been a tendency to rely on the opinion of probably people a bit like us on this panel, turning up on a Tuesday evening to a wet Monday evening, I should say, to go and talk about planning and this new development. And yes, sometimes being NIMBYs, let's be honest, hope not these. But if you ask, technology is changing this. If you engage early, if you ask people simple and meaningful questions and use technology to get to hundreds, and we often get down to thousands, we have our own platform, we're doing it in Ukraine, we're doing it around the world, ask people, what's your favourite place? What's your least favourite place in this neighbourhood? Where would you like to go for a walk with your children? Where would you let go of your 5-year-old's hand? What would you like to see as what we emulate for new homes or for new places? Then it's like unleashing a cork. The importance and the value and the sincerity and the importance of the feedback you get. And you get it not just from the dozen people who turn it up, you can get it from hundreds, even thousands on some occasions. So that's how to get agency, in my view. And then just finally, I won't talk about car parking, but I will say this. We will only get out of the car parking dilemma if we move from being house builders to town builders and town makers and think about the infrastructure and the trams and the buses and the walkability. Because if people are forced to rely on their car, not unreasonably, they're going to insist on a car.
Yeah, all right.
Excellent. Sorry, there's no more time for any questions. I do apologise. But I'd like to offer profound thanks to my panel for what I think was a really engaging and insightful and valuable debate. So thank you all very much. And thank you all for attending. A very shameless plug. I didn't expect this discussion to cover tall buildings, but PX, Policy Exchange, has done an extensive report on tall buildings very recently, so you're all welcome to have a look at that. And I'm glad we came to a consensus that high rise doesn't necessarily mean high density either. There are other ways to achieve it. So thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And also, we've been talking about beauty all day. We are in a beautiful city. Take time. There are wonderful examples of urban and architectural beauty within walking distance of where we are. So if you want to learn about beauty, take a walk through Liverpool. Thank you. Cheers. And the Brolly.